Hello and welcome. This is the last part of our American section during ScriptMarket.Pro at Kameralne Lato Festival in Radom. Before we begin, again, I should mention that we wouldn't be able to do it without the support of the Embassy of the United States in Warsaw and American Corner Radom. Thank you for the support. And today, our guest is Jennifer Dunne, who is a location manager, worked on such projects as Truman Show, Crash, The Mandalorian, and now Westworld. Hello, Jennifer.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to us. Good morning to you.
Thank you.
You're in Los Angeles, as we established a couple of minutes ago, so a bit earlier there. But then again, you told us a couple of minutes ago what are your usual hours of work. So 6 a.m. seems like nothing compared to them.
It's true. Your schedule has to be very fluid.
Yeah. Look, our subject is the role of location manager in pre-production of feature film. But of course, we can also touch about the production process, not only pre-production process, whatever you want to cover. But my first question would be, how do you actually become a location manager? And what are the best ways to learn the craft, the job, to gain experience in the job, and how was it in your case, and if you have any maybe advice for people who want to get into that business.
Well, I definitely did not go the traditional route of becoming a location manager. I started in production, which I think is a great way for anyone to start because you learn all avenues of the business. And I worked my way up. My degree in college was in public relations, so it had nothing to do with the film business. I started as a production assistant and worked my way through production and then into wardrobe. And literally, a location manager that I worked with said, I need someone to go convince 5,000 people that it's a good idea to let us land a helicopter in their neighborhood for 5 nights straight. And off I went as a very young lady to Newport Beach for the movie Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion to convince 5,000 people they wanted to let us do that. We did do it for a week straight. But I would say that, one of the things that's really important about being a location manager is having very strong people skills because every day my job is different. And there could be days that I'm talking to a farmer, and there could be days I'm sitting in a governor's office, and there's days that I'm meeting with police departments and fire departments or, road departments, homeowners associations. Um, I think that having a basis of things like computer skills, knowing Excel, we work on, we have websites when we scout, which I'll get into the scouting process since that's part of pre production. But when we're scouting, we have to be able to manage certain aspects of a computer. So, basic photography, computer skills, people skills. I mean, if you really don't like meeting people or talking to people and you're an introvert, being a location manager is a really bad job for you. You might be able to be a location scout, but as a location manager, you have to be able to solve problems very quickly. You have to be able to think outside the box. You have to be able to find solutions to things that you would never think you were trying to solve.
Like, for
Because
example, what?
for example, the homeowner that has a newborn baby right next to the location that you're filming that absolutely doesn't want to go to a hotel, that, has a 2 year old that is allergic to the exhaust from a generator. like how you're going to get equipment into a state park that won't allow vehicles when it's a 5 mile hike into that location. So, I mean, those are just some little examples. And every day, I mean, that's one of the things about my job that is so fantastic is every day is different. And it can be where I'm working in Los Angeles, or I could be working in Mexico, or I could be working in New York. There's so many different places. I tend to be in Los Angeles now because I'm a mother. So based on that, I don't want to travel. But I spent 10 to 12 years of my life on the road. And for me, being dropped into a city that I didn't know was amazing. But you have to be able to think on your feet very quickly to get your boundaries, to know, to be able to integrate yourself with the locals. So, I mean, to me, if someone came to me, if my niece came to me and said, I really want to be a location manager, what's the most important things for me to study in school? I would say you need to be very computer proficient. You need to take some photography classes and geography classes, learn, budgeting skills. And then a lot of it comes to experience. It's a job that requires a lot of organization. Um, to give you an idea of how the process goes, a lot of times I'm hired before even a production designer is hired. So I can be hired by a number of people. I can be hired by the studio. I can be hired by the director. I can be hired by a production designer who establishes the look of a show. I can be hired by a producer who's concerned about the money end of it. So because our job starts creatively, but then we're responsible for a lot of money, and it can be just depending on the size of the project. It could be a couple $100,000 an episode of television to $15 million if it's a huge movie, and it just that's dictated by the script. So everyone has a different vested interest in having an opinion when we're hired, and it just depends who's going to get control of that. I've been hired often before a production designer is brought in, which can be challenging because you don't know what their vision will be. Our job in television or in a film will start with reading a script and breaking the script down. When we break the script down, we're going through and figuring out what's going to be built on location, and or what's going to be found on location and what's going to be built on a soundstage. Once we know what that is, you're literally it can be 10 locations, or I think the largest location driven movie I had was over 100 locations in 5 states. So you figure out, you break that down, figure out where it is, what they're looking for, and then you start to tackle whatever the biggest location is. And when you're scouting, I literally go and knock on strangers' doors and say, hi, my name's Jennifer. I work for Paramount Pictures. We're doing a film and looking for a house. And sometimes people are interested, and sometimes they slam the door in your face. You know, COVID's presented a different challenge in our interactions, where we do a lot more dropping letters, because we have different safety protocols that the unions put on us. But for the most part, there's been shows that I've looked at 5 houses and the director's picked one, and I've looked at 500. So once we look at those locations, we photograph them, we upload them onto a website. I happen to use SmugMug, which SmugMug.Pro, because I like the way that I can organize it on that. We then show those photographs to the production designer. The production designer narrows down, let's say maybe their top 15 choices. Once they narrow those down, we show them to the director. The director may say, I want to look at 10 of them. We then go in person and look at them. And the director may say, I love this one, or no, none of them work. And some days you get out of a scout van and you think, oh, that was a good day. And some days you get out of a scout van and you're like, that was terrible. They could start by thinking they want a Spanish house. And by the time you film it, it could be modern. So you need to have a little bit of flexibility, because sometimes it takes the director or the designer a little bit of time to come full circle on what they're really looking for. Um, and you do that as many times as 100 times over. I've had jobs where I was the only person on it, and I've had jobs where there's been 25 people in our department. Um, Once we get to the point where we find the locations, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So as we're looking for the locations, some of the things that are important, and obviously it makes a difference where we're filming. It could be an urban environment. So that's one set. If you're filming a scene at a ski area, you have to be mindful of what's the access, what's the weather like? Can you get in? Can you get out? Do the roads need to be plowed? How are you going to get equipment up the mountain? How much support staff do you need from that facility? If you're in a national forest, how long does it take to turn permits? Do they limit filming in certain months of the year? Those are all things that when you're looking at the location, you have to make sure that you can permit it and get access to it. Bring, a normal feature film or large television show will have a crew of 150 people. So if you are doing feature film or television, can you get 150 people into these locations? Will the fire department sign off on you being there? If you have a big shootout or you're blowing up a building, can you get the permits to do that? And that's really driven by the location itself and what you're needing to do. I think in my career in 26 years, the location that took me the longest to secure was we closed the port of Los Angeles, which is one of the largest ports in the United States. And in order to do that, every container yard had to sign off on us doing that because we were sending a car off of a bridge into the water for Charlie's Angels. Well, you have to stop the ship traffic. So the Coast Guard, the US Coast Guard was involved because they had to stop all the ships 5 miles out. Well, then you have the port police. Then you have all the container yards that come in through the channel under this large bridge. Then you have to close the bridge. So you have the police department. You have all the traffic plans. There's a lot of different people. It took us 9 months to do it because not every container yard had an idea what their schedule was. So, it's different every day. And the script really dictates what we will be looking for.
For me, part of the appeal of these meetings, these conversations, is shedding a light on the film professions that are very often overlooked, that are not so much talked about, and which are very often they are perceived as being strictly a business or strictly logistics. And of course, like you mentioned, business and logistics is a very, very important part of your job as a location manager. But at the same time, you really have to be creative. And what you do is absolutely also contributing to the artistic look of the film. So this is, from what I understand from you talking about, your job is sort of a mix between this logistical business point of view and creative artistic point of view.
Absolutely. You have to be able to use both sides of your brain. The job starts very, very creatively. And even in production, once you have the locations, you're looking for creative solutions to problems. You're looking how to turn no into a yes. When the city says, oh, you can't close that freeway down. Well, what if I do it on a Saturday? What if I do it on a Sunday? You're always trying to.
What if I wait till the next election and I talk to the new mayor?
It's true. It's, like depending where you are, there's certain mayors that are super film friendly and some that aren't. I mean, in the United States and around the world, there's, certain places that have really strong incentives. And, I can go and pick up a crew of 10 people, no problem. And there's other cities that I've gone to that I've had to bring everyone from Los Angeles. We can impact the look of a show quite a bit. I think the best example I have for that is I was born and raised in Los Angeles. And when I did the movie Crash and I met with the director, it really bothered me. The opening scene, he had written and directed the movie. But when we first met, the opening scene was off of a freeway in Los Angeles. And it was scripted where they dumped a body. And it was just not a place that you would really dump a body because there was always traffic.
And so I said, not a wise thing to do if you have a body to dump.
It seemed a little strange to me myself. So I said to him, I don't want to start this meeting in a strange way, but I just have a really hard time believing anyone's dumping a body in the Sepulveda Pass. And he's like, well, why? And I said, because there's always people there. Like, that wouldn't be where you dump a body. I said, can I show you some other options of places that maybe it would happen? And he's like, sure, go ahead. So I went, in my mind, there was two places off the top of my head. Both were on city streets, but they went through oil fields and they had views of the city of Los Angeles. And so I went and photographed them and I showed him the pictures, and he and the designer both liked them. And so they said, okay, let's go look. Well, because we had oil companies surrounding us, we had one of the representatives with us. I'd never met the man. I'd taken the pictures from the city streets. We just talked on the phone. And he heard us talking and he said, oh, you're seeing's dropping a body. And he goes, yeah, we find a body up here about twice a year. And the director looked at me. I was like, I really didn't know that. I said, but for me, if I was going to get rid of a body, like this would be a place I would think about. And so that was where we shot the opening and end sequence of the movie.
I like
so,
I like the casual way he just said, yeah, with bodies, normal, usual, the business as
yes,
usual.
yes, it was a little strange, but it was, a little off the beaten path, but easily accessible. From that moment on, I would say in my entire career, Crash, it's always fun to be on a show that wins Best Picture for the Academy Awards, which that one did. But that movie in of itself, after that, the director and the production designer really gave me a lot of freedom because neither one of them were natives to Los Angeles. The director grew up in Canada, the production designer grew up on the East Coast. And they were like, well, this is your city. Show us kind of through your eyes where these things would take place. And to have that much freedom to really try and give them the best look made it a really enjoyable experience. And part of that was the designer didn't have a lot of money. It was not a movie that we spent a lot of money on. I think the budget was $6 million. And so he couldn't afford to change stuff. We needed to find it pretty much as it was. And I mean, I think one of the biggest compliments of my career was he was nominated for an art director's award for that. And the morning that he got the nomination at 6 a.m., he called me and he said, you and I both know that all I did was take down chain link fence on this movie. So thank you for giving us an amazing backdrop, which, it's such a collaboration. I mean, we work for the production designer, but we work so closely together. And to be acknowledged for the work that we do to help contribute to that is a great feeling. And was a fun on that show was a lot of fun because they kind of cut us loose and didn't give us very strict parameters. They said, how would you interpret it? And of course, if they didn't like how we interpreted it, we went and found what they liked. But it was fun to have that kind of freedom. And on some projects you do. And on some projects, someone walks into a room and says, I want to shoot at Dodger Stadium. And you're just making that happen. Um, and, that's different on every show. And it just depends, what the process is.
Apart from the fact that some projects, some directors, some production designers give you more freedom than others, when you, in terms of collaboration with production designer and director, what is the most important thing to you, regardless of the fact if you have freedom or no? Although I imagine that if the more freedom you have, the more enjoyable maybe your job is. But what is the most important thing you look for in collaboration with production designer and director? Maybe something that you're basing that you are basing your decision of if you wanna whether to join the project or not.
Obviously, if you've worked with people, it's a little bit easier because you know their styles. But I think one of the most important things is communication to make sure that under any circumstances, because the project could be a Western, it could be, sci-fi, it could, there's so many different elements of what we could be doing. And knowing that when a production designer says, I want a house that has this, exactly what they're talking about. That's another element that is a good thing to study is architecture. If someone says, I want a, Monterey colonial home, knowing what they're talking about makes it a lot easier. Um, when you get into a rhythm, when you do a television show with someone for a year or years, you get to shorthand. They may, instead of having to spend 10 minutes explaining something, they might be able to give you 20 words. And you're like, got it. Okay, I know. Or for us, like in television, more than in film, because in film, you really set the entire movie before you begin production. But in television, it can be anywhere from 5 to 15 days that you're doing a new script. So I could have a production designer, we could be talking, oh, this new script has a building, a lobby that is supposed to be in Washington, D.C. And they may say, or I may say, do you remember that building we looked at for episode 4? And it had this security guard in the lobby. And I can go to my computer and pull up those pictures. And then we don't even have to go look at something because that may be perfect. It might not have been perfect for the office building of the CIA or the FBI, but it might be perfect for the office building for something else. And having that library of photographs to be able to go back to, especially in television, is hugely beneficial. And if you and the production designer are on shorthand, it can make that process much more effective. Because as I explained, we could be looking at 5 locations or we could be looking at 500. So when you have 7 days to find, TV shows, sometimes they have one location for the TV show, but we could do a TV show that has 25 locations in 15 days or 25 locations in 5 days, depending on how many locations a day that we film. So you don't have a lot of time to find that. In a film, you have a lot more time. Usually it's 6 to 12 weeks to plan that. So that gives you a lot more time to look for it. But in television, it's really important to be able to roll quickly. So if you are able to interpret what's in the designer or director's head, um, it makes that process much easier. So that's where a lot of times production designers or directors will say, this is the location manager I want, because they know they can take their vision and find it.
You mentioned Western sci-fis, and m- my the question I also asked at our the question I also presented to our other guests, how much the nature and the genre of the film, depending on well, maybe it's a Western, maybe it's a sci-fi, like you said, how much does that influence your work? And do you really take different maybe approach from the artistic creative point of view, depending on what genre film you're doing, what kind of world you're helping to create, or you just apply the same sort of rules to that sort of define your job?
I think that one of the big things is, where do you like to work? Do you want to be hiking mountain trails and in a 4-wheel drive vehicle, or do you want to be in city streets? I can remember years ago, I was offered a job, and I loved the director and I loved the production designer, but the job took place in a men's maximum security prison. And I was in my late 20s, and my sister was a attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I remember some of the stories about her going into some of these prisons, and it made me feel like, for me personally, as someone that has a hard time separating my job from my life. I mean, our job is all encompassing. My phone can ring 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with neighbors that have an issue, or someone that, can't find where they're going, or the permit office, whatever the reason. And I had to say to myself, do I really want to spend the next 9 months scouting men's maximum security prisons and then working in that environment, where you're searched every day before you go into this environment, because they were filming in a real prison. And for me personally, the movie turned out amazing, and it was with Denzel Washington. And it was a hard job to turn down, because I liked everyone involved, but I was not prepared to be in that environment for a long period of time. Like, I thought that it would impact my life too much in a way I wasn't interested in doing that. Um, I think people that do Survivor around the world, like, you're dropped into these cities, but you're setting up a place for production to work that doesn't look like there's any infrastructure. That's a very different situation than working in New York City. Um, so I think part of it is what you enjoy. I enjoy having it different every time. Um, I enjoy the research that goes into if you're doing a project that is 1920s Los Angeles or 1920s Chicago in Los Angeles, where we're doubling a city, at a different time period. There's a whole different level of research that the designer will do part of that, but it also falls onto our shoulders versus like when we were doing The Mandalorian, I did the second season of that. A lot of the stuff for the sci-fi world is computer enhanced. So we would find locations and take a small crew, like a group of maybe 5 or 10 people from Lucasfilm. They would photograph and LiDAR scan those areas. But then, so they would be practical locations, but it would be with a much smaller crew. So places that I might not be able to take 150 people, you could take a group of 5 people. They could do their work and then computer enhance it and shoot it on a soundstage. So, like, that's a very different situation than having to take everyone there. There's been shows that I've done second units, which I love because the second unit is usually the stunt unit or special effects. And to me, that's kind of a fun part to participate in, when you're crashing cars and blowing the buildings up. But there's people that hate that. There's people that have looked at projects that I've done that have said to me, "Why would you ever do that? It reads like a practical joke on a location manager." So I think it's really what people
Someone
enjoy
is
doing.
trolling you.
Yeah, it's true. I think it really is so independent to the person as to what they enjoy to do. Um, because in any given situation, our days are different every day because we rely so much on the outside world. We have one foot in reality and one foot in fantasy land. And like, there's times I have to remind, the people that I work with, like, I know you want this, but I have to answer to the police department and the FAA and the fire department and the Coast Guard and, whoever those jurisdictions are that control that space.
Mhm. Yeah. You touched upon this subject a little bit right now, but I think it's interesting, so I want to follow up on that. The digital revolution in cinema and in audiovisual media as a whole, and the post-production evolution and all those things you can now do in post-productions that you wouldn't have been able to do, like 10 years ago or 15 years ago. That must have influenced your work and production designers work massively. In what way?
Well, it's expensive. So let's start there. So it really depends on what project you're on because absolutely what, like, our counterparts in visual effects can do is amazing and it's so cool. That being said, you have to have a lot of money to do it. So you're not every project can do that. And on Westworld, on The Mandalorian, visual effects play a part in both of those projects very heavily. But you still need the foundation to build upon. So, people have said to me, well, aren't you worried that, everything's going to be computer generated? Like, as soon as they have, stock footage of these locations and you're not going to have a job. It doesn't really work that way. because every director has a different angle they want. Every director, some want to shoot it from a drone, some want to shoot it from, steady cam, some want to shoot it from cameras on the ground. And obviously it is changing and continually changing. But that being said, I don't worry that there's not going to be a job for a location manager based on technology. I think it just affords you more opportunities to get into places that you may not be able to get into with a full crew.
Yeah, and some of the films you worked on are really interesting in terms of production design and how much the locations and production design influence its narrative aesthetic. And the main film I'm thinking about is the Truman Show, which is which is a sort of an artificial world in which the Jim Carrey character lives in. And I'm really interested what kind of a challenge for you as a location manager was this film, because it's so unusual in a way that the idea was that it had to be deliberately artificial.
Yes. So on that project, I did the Los Angeles work. The town was in Florida, and another location team had found that we had to match things to Florida in Los Angeles. So, for example, one of the things we were matching was a beach. Well, I went from Mexico to Northern California because we had to find a beach that had 180 degrees with no lights, which on the coast of California is more of a challenge than you would think of. I spent weeks taking shots during the day and taking shots at night. And then we narrowed it down to two beaches. And based on where it fell in the schedule, one of the two beaches had an endangered bird that was nesting during the 3-week period we wanted to be filming. So then the beach that we ended up having to go to, because the biologists and the state wildlife people wouldn't approve us at the other beach, had neighbors. So that then we found the beach with no lights, but we were in the middle of Malibu and we had to get all the neighbors to sign off on being there. So and like that's a perfect example. When we did that, there's something in Southern California called grunion. They're a kind of sea life. The grunion run a certain time of year. We scheduled our filming during the grunion running. So all of a sudden, all these seals kept coming onto the beach. Well, whose problem does that become? It becomes our problem, because anything that no one knows what to do with, the first thing they say is locations, and it becomes our problem. So those are all things that are just like in another day's work for us. But I do think, that what impact a location can have on a film or television show can be huge. I mean, if you think of King Kong, the first thing most people think of is the Empire State Building. If you think of Harry Potter, people think of Oxford, which they used, all over Harry Potter.
But
Yes,
and if you think about Blade Runner, you think about Bradbury's building in LA.
Yes. So, I mean, there's so many locations that leave a lasting imprint on people's mind. So there's locations that you forget. I mean, we were joking the other day where I said to one of my younger assistants, I said, oh, there's nothing worse than being on a movie where you spend all this time, organizing closing streets and, getting rooftop access and doing a big car crash. And then the movie comes out and you're like, where'd that scene go? You're like, wait, it didn't make it. That's terrible.
I spent 10 months getting the permission.
Yes, and it happens. It definitely happens.
Apart from that, disappointment where something is edited out of the film, because that is, like, this is also a thing that the actors who are working with Terrence Malick have this problem, because he is getting this whole ensemble cast sometimes, and very famous names, and then it turns out that they are not in the movie. Their scenes just went out. So this is the pain of filmmaking. But in terms of disappointments and maybe some obstacles you were not able to overcome, what do you have any examples of that, and some kind of a tight spot that you really had to be quite creative to make your way out of?
Well, I've been in several situations. I mean, it's hard. As a filmmaker, we follow other filmmakers. And just because I do my job some way, it doesn't mean that the person before me necessarily did it the right way. So I can think of a movie where we needed to close a bridge in Portland, Oregon for 10 nights. And we followed a movie that didn't do particularly well when they had closed a bridge. And it became an entire process where you had to go to the county board of commissioners, which was a big hearing to get permission. And no one really wants to give you permission to close major arteries for any length of time. And so, a lot of times I'll have to go into city council meetings, I'll have to go into county board of commissioners meetings and convince them that it's worthwhile for them to let us do that. That was one instance where they were inclined to tell us no. They had major damage to a bridge based on a previous experience. And that's a challenge because you're having to turn what someone's experience was around. Equally difficult up in the Pacific Northwest, I wanted to do a chase scene through a town that had a small couple $1 million movie in town and done all these deals and not paid their bills. And so here I'm trying to basically close down a main drag of a street, and all of these people's experience with a film company was a bad experience. And I had to explain to them, I'm working for Sony Pictures. Our checks are good. We're not gonna behave.
You might have heard of us. We are a sort of company which is quite well known.
Right.
Not
right.
known to be poor.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we joke. I literally said to someone yesterday, I was like, don't worry, Uncle HBO's checks will clear. But that's part of it. And even in that sense, just in the last year, we've gone from paper checks, which we used to just hand, when I started, we used to hand people cash. Then it went to, we handed them checks. Now it's all direct deposit. But, people are very apprehensive about a direct deposit. So you have to explain to them, no. We'll get proof once the wire transfer has gone through. You'll see it. We'll tell you when it was accepted by your bank. So it's continually changing. I mean, when I started as a location manager, we took pictures with film. And we would, do panorama pictures and tape them together in folders. And now it's all digital. And even in that sense, the commercial world is very different than film and television in how they scout, because they're looking for different things. For me as a location manager, I do probably one commercial a year, but it's not the environment I prefer, because a lot of times they have someone scout a project, but the producers will manage it. And for me, I want to give someone my word. I'm going to be the one taking care of your house. I'm the first one you're going to see. I'm the last person you're going to see. I am lucky enough to have, a team of people that work with me, and we roll from project to project. So I know what their strengths and weaknesses are. Some might be better to put on a ranch, and some might be better to put in a neighborhood. And once you figure that out, it makes it much easier to kind of devise a plan moving forward. But I'm a huge believer that we are guests if we are in a neighborhood, if we are in a business district, if we are in the national forest, that we are guests and we have the ability to leave places better than we found them. And that is part of our responsibility, because you don't want the film company after you hearing that you weren't a good tenant.
First chance for our audience to ask a question. If there is a question, please raise your hand. There is a question, I will hear it and then repeat it. The question or the request, I should say, is can you tell us more about The Mandalorian and your work on The Mandalorian?
Well, a lot of the work on that is done on a soundstage with technology that is ever changing, which is a lot of basically LED screens. So we work a lot on that show in pre-production, where we are getting with the designer about what they want and then setting up Lucasfilm to send small groups of photographers to film the locations. Then those images get projected on the screens, and the production designer designs actual things in front of the screens. So they're basically like three-dimensional sets. Then on top of that, there's a lot of the work on that is on a backlot. So we still have to do permits and deal with the fire department and the police department and the logistics of it, but it's not an ever changing, moving process. That show, because everything is in a fantasy world, usually you augment the locations pretty heavily.
Another question, maybe, or another request? If not, then I would also like to ask about, because you mentioned that the location can influence the show and film in a very, very heavy and very unique way. And how did you think about, and how you think now about your part and your role in creating the aesthetic of the film, the narrative of the film, and maybe your thinking about that changed throughout your career? When you started, maybe you thought about that a bit different than now after all these years of experience?
I think when I started, by chance, like I said, someone came and asked me to go convince, 5,000 people of something. But on that, I remember it very vividly. I was in front of a library in Orange County, California, and I had this thought that I was like, well, maybe this is a good fit for me because part of it is creative and then the other part of it is business. That is kind of challenging. I dabbled in wardrobe and I had a hard time. I didn't want to spend 12 or 14 hours at Barney's or Armani. Like, it just wasn't really for me. And because I didn't study film and because I don't come from a family background of film, I definitely was like, well, maybe I should go to law school. Maybe I should, do something different. And when I fell into being a location assistant, the fact that the job was different every day and the fact that it was creative and business was incredibly appealing to me. I also like the fact that I could go to work in jeans and pullover. I didn't have to put a suit on every day. But I think that for me, the fact that no day was the same, and that comes with the good and the bad. There's nothing worse than having someone dress you down in front of an entire crew because they're upset about something. I tell my staff when I hire them, I'm very happy if I show up and they're just like sitting on a tailgate of a truck, because that means before we showed up with 150 or 200 people, we did our job. If you show up on a set and a location department's running around like crazy, then
Something went wrong.
They didn't prepare. There's always going to be things that you don't anticipate. If it's a gardener showing up that you have to go ask, can you pay him to come back another day? If it's someone, all of a sudden they want to put a camera somewhere that they hadn't planned, can you, do a deal and get insurance to be on someone's property? Those things come up all the time. But for the most part, you'd like to think that we've done our job before we show up with 200 people. And that's, people initially look at me like I'm crazy when I say, oh no, I'm perfectly happy if you're like hanging out, talking to the cops. And then they realize why.
You were talking about your relationship with a production designer and director. What about your relationship with the producer? What are your maybe good and bad experiences in that regard, and what is the most important thing in the collaboration with the producer, is also who is in charge also, of course, of this business logistics part, but sometimes also contributing, very often maybe could even contributing, depending on what film we're talking about, to the creative part of the film.
Well, for obviously the producers, not only our department can be a department that when it goes wrong, it gets very expensive. So the producers are very invested, obviously, in making sure that things move smoothly. So not only is us adhering to whatever budget, and a lot of times they have a roadmap, but that changes depending on what's going on. So we budget for every single location that we're at, and give them a budget if it's a TV show or a film that we're working off of. So part of that is like when I said in the beginning, like knowing Excel, knowing the budget, that comes with experience. That comes with, vendors have all the support services. How much do you pay for a driveway? Well, that's different in every city. And that just comes with really doing it with time. But I think one of the hard things can be is that I have found cities require a little bit more lead time in the last couple years than they used to. Probably partially because our footprint has gotten bigger. When we bring in our trucks, it could be, 4 city blocks. And producers don't like to be given parameters often. And we're kind of the voice of reality. Like, well, you've got to give me, a week's notice. Or on a project that I did earlier this year, we were filming at a mall. So in order to film at that mall, because the stores didn't open until 11, we had to do deals with every single store in the mall to have the gates up and have the lights on so that it looked open. Well, everyone's working remotely because of COVID. So we needed enough time to not only get to the corporations, but then track the people down that were working from home so that we could do the deals. So, that's something where we often have to be the bearer of news that maybe someone doesn't want to hear. Um, or, someone will say, I want to close this freeway. And, the Department of Transportation will come back and say, you can only do that from midnight until 4 a.m. based on traffic counts. You never want to, walk into someone's office and tell them they can't have what they want. But unfortunately, that's part of the job. Um, and we try and find loopholes for that all the time, any way we can. But sometimes you're not as lucky.
So because sometimes there is this stereotype about the producer, which is, as all stereotypes, it's not entirely true, and it's not always true, that the producer is sort of quashing the director's dreams. Which is of course not true, because what producer does basically is what you just talked about, that he confronts people with reality and and wants to be creative but based on reality. What can we do? So if I understand you correctly, you sometimes are a voice of that reality to the producer.
Yeah, some might call us the dream killers. Like, yeah, I think we break the news to the producers. Sometimes we have to break it to the directors. Sometimes the producers break it to the directors. But I think very much like a location manager has their foot in reality and in fantasyland, the producers too, on a different scale, because they want to give the directors what the directors want. They want to give the designers what the designers want, but they also have to answer to the studio or whoever's putting up the money. And it's kind of like us. We want to give the directors and the designers what they want, and their their creativity, like the sky's the limit. But we have to answer to the people whose jurisdiction it is. And the police department and fire department don't always find our proposals appropriate.
did you have a experience? Well, I'm not going to say dangerous, but maybe a little more tense than it should be when you when you wanted to. I'm not talking about producer, director, and then this kind of a relationship, but I'm talking about talking to people about some. You want to use that location, you want to use that house, you want to do this and do that. Were there any situations in your career when you thought, okay, we have to back off because it is getting ugly?
Well, I have to. There have been. I mean, over the course of my career, technology's changed so much. So, when I started, we all had pagers and used payphones. And now everyone has cell phones. So there were definitely times as a young woman, I would call the office and say, I'm in this neighborhood, like this is where I am. If you don't hear from me in half an hour, call the police. um, like you never know when you show up and knock on the door, what's behind that door. And I've knocked on doors, and literally the minute I walked on and knocked on a door out of town with a designer, we were driving and we found a house. He's like, it's perfect. And so I walk up to the door and knock on the door. And as soon as they opened the door, I knew I was in trouble because the entire hallway was pack rat. It was a complete hoarder's house. But at that point, what do you say? Like, you've knocked on the door. And so you kind of have to go through with, I work for Paramount Pictures and we're doing this film and we're looking for a house. And, the designer and I both know we're not taking everything out of this house. But do we split the interior and exterior? Because that's something that we do often. I'm already kind of committed to having this conversation. Or I was by myself years ago. I was looking for a house that was supposed to be in San Francisco. I was very aware of the area, that it wasn't a great neighborhood. But when I knocked on the door, at first, a young man came out and stood on the porch and talked to me and said it was his grandmother's house. When I went in to the house, there was 18 to 20 young men, and I was by myself. And they had prison tattoos and were very clearly not the most savory bunch. Um, but I had already committed to scouting that house. Like, I mean, what was my choice? To turn and run out the front door, or to continue to do my job and like try and get out of there as quickly and safely as I could? So, it's not always great situations, and being able to think on your feet and be safe and be aware of your surroundings is very important. When we were doing Crash, this is a perfect example. We were in a neighborhood. It wasn't a particularly bad neighborhood. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. We had 6 police officers with us. We were shooting at a liquor store. We show up to put cones on the street for when we get there, and there had been a homicide. And so the streets are all closed. So we navigate through that and figure out how to get that, dialed in, because the company's not coming for 10 hours. And then one of the security guards tells someone that Ludacris is going to be there that night. All of a sudden, all of the neighbors are on rooftops because they all want to see Ludacris. I had to call in 20 police officers, barricades for the street, and figure out how we were going to keep at bay all of the locals who just wanted to watch Ludacris act. So there was no way when I woke up that morning that I anticipated any of that happening. And I had to figure out very quickly how to keep our cast and our crew safe. Um, the paparazzi often can be very challenging for our job because legally they have certain freedoms, but we're trying to keep them away from either a protected set or an actor. So, those are things that you can't anticipate. You don't know when they're going to happen.
Another chance for a question, if there is one. It is the last chance to ask questions. So if there is one, I strongly encourage to do it. If not, then thank you very much, Jennifer,
My pleasure.
for talking to us. And let's have a great day. as it
Thank you.
because I know it is still the beginning of your day. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to the Embassy of the United States of America in Warsaw and American Corner, Radom, for supporting our ScriptMarket.Pro section and our American part of this section. So, Jennifer, once again, thank you. Have a great day. Take care.
Thank you very
Don't-
much.
Don't knock on suspicious doors, and stay safe. And thank you all for watching all the events at this edition of Kameralne Lato Festival in Radom. See you next time.